Is it possible to be disappointed by a 64-win season? Yes, it is. But I don't think that's necessarily what the case is here in Cleveland. I think it was a successful season that fans should be happy with. Um, but also, it is a little bit fair to say it was a disappointing end to it. Uh, it was a combination of some injuries as well as just some poor luck in other ways that resulted in them losing in the second round to Indiana, despite having the best record in the East all season. And it was looking like it was going to be a Cleveland OKC NBA Finals. That was not the case. Where do the Cavs go from here? They obviously still have its excellent core, plenty of depth, just didn't go their way in the playoffs. So do you just fully run it back? Do you make adjustments? What adjustments do you make? Cleveland definitely has a lot of pieces to work with. Not confident that they're going to make drastic changes to what we saw this season, but I don't think they should. First season with a new head coach and you win 64 games. What happens in year two with this new head coach? Maybe it gets even better. I think there is evaluations that need to be made, trying to look at what this team can do to be better moving forward. But with Jason Tatum likely out for most of next season, the East becomes just as wide open as it was this year. So will Cleveland be able to run it back? We will discuss that. Before I do that, I just want to remind you guys that BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform, and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Of course, we have baseball season in full swing. We've got the NHL playoffs going on, and of course, the NBA playoffs going on. We just talked about the wide open East. If you want to get in on the action for game 5 of the Pacers Knicks series, New York is currently favored by 4.5 points. Indiana is looking to close out this series and create our NBA Finals matchup, while New York is looking to stay alive at home. We'll see what ends up happening with that one, but if you want to get in on the action there, BetOnline's a great place to do that. And they'll also have lines available for betting on the NBA Finals as a series, as well as individual games. So if you want to get in there, it's all available on BetOnline. They have the largest selection of odds on everything from the MLB to the NHL to UFC, and they remain the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. BetOnline, the game starts here. Okay, as I said, Cleveland 64-18 this season. And now they're going to be entering an Eastern Conference next year where Indiana and New York will be among the top teams. Milwaukee is probably going to look very different. Boston is going to look very different. It's basically going to be wide open again. This year, to me, it felt like Boston was the best team, and that was proven incorrect in the playoffs. Even before Tatum got hurt, they were on track to lose to New York. So it's not just that they lost just because of Tatum. I think they were already down 3-1. Or I guess Tatum got hurt when they were about to go down 3-1. And then Indiana was just far and away better than anybody expected. But Cleveland is still a very, very, very good team, as they proved all season long. And they should feel confident that if they just decide to run things back, that they will be in contention to make it out of the Eastern Conference and into the NBA Finals next season. Again, that's just with the way things are right now, but they could make changes. There's reports that they could be interested in, I guess, that Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell are the untouchables on this team, that they might be more willing to move on from Jared Allen and or Darius Garland. There was also reports that there could be the framework of a Darius Garland, Jalen Suggs swap. That is possible. And not sure exactly how that looks. I think Darius Garland in Orlando would be a match made in heaven, whereas Jalen Suggs providing them with some 3-and-D usage on the perimeter. He'll be a better defender than Garland was. He can still space the floor, and the ball will be in Donovan Mitchell's hands. We won't get into the specifics of that because we don't know exactly how likely that is to happen. After it happens, if it happens, then we'll talk about that. But right now, we're just going to talk about Cleveland as a whole, but just wanted to throw out that possibility. So won 64 games. They have 2 second-round picks this year, picks 49 and 58. With all these players that are deciding to return to college and get paid NIL money as opposed to tossing their name into the NBA draft and potentially going in the second round, this draft doesn't have the same depth that it once did. And I still think, because it was a very good class, that there's going to be some players that go in the early second round that are going to be very impactful. I think getting into picks 49 and 58, they could still make some decent picks, but I'm not quite as optimistic about who they'd be able to add with these picks now that some of these players are returning to college. Just the reality of the situation now with NIL money. Players can choose to return to college and get paid arguably more than they would on a second round deal. Plus, they're going to have a chance to improve their draft stock and go even earlier the year after. The Xavier Lee, I believe, is the point guard who transferred to Florida. Let me double check that as I'm saying that because I just saw it right before I started this. Is set to make like $6 million in NIL money this season. Xavier Lee. So it's between Florida and another shoe deal that he signed with Serious Player Only. I saw an estimate that he was projected to make over $6 million or something absurd like that for a college player. So yeah, I mean, that's more than he would make potentially as a late first round player next season. So makes sense for some of these guys to return, have a chance to compete for national championships, awards, go even earlier in the draft. It makes sense. Cleveland doesn't have first round picks this year. They do have, they'll be on the wrong side of swaps, but 2026 and 2028 picks in the first round. Nothing in 2027 or 2029. Then they have their own first in 2030 and 2031. That's when things get normal again. But right now, they just don't have that much draft capital. They have a lot of talent on this roster that if they want to make moves, they can do that. But they don't have this excess amount of picks. They use those picks to acquire some of their talent, specifically Donovan Mitchell. As far as who's under contract for next season, most of these guys are staying put that were part of the rotation. There's a few guys that could be on the way out. Most notably would be Ty Jerome. And Sam Merrill is also an unrestricted free agent. Those two are both playing big roles off the bench. Jerome even more than Sam Merrill. And Jerome probably did a lot to the point where he probably is going to demand too large of a contract for Cleveland to keep him, but we'll see. And then Tristan Thompson, Javonte Green are unrestricted free agents, and they have a team option for Jim Okeke. Like some of those guys are like they're not going to impact much that we're going to talk about. But most of the rest of this team is still under contract for next season. I would say that Jared Allen at $20 million is a very, very team-friendly contract. So the extensions for Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley will also go into effect next season. So that means even less room for them to work with. But they have a talented roster with everyone that's playing significant minutes under 30. They don't need to make dramatic moves to have a chance to win a championship next season. That's just the way it is. I mean, if every single team decides, okay, we have to compare ourselves to OKC or one of the other top teams just to say, do we think we can beat them in a 7-game series? Like Cleveland doesn't need to do that. You could say in order to win a championship, yes, you would need to beat OKC or someone that beats OKC in a 7-game series. Fair. But to get to that series, you need to make it out of the East. And I think if you're comparing Cleveland's roster to everyone else in the East, even though we just saw them not look good at all against Indiana, you feel good about your chances to be competitive in a series against anyone in the East next season. And I think just getting to a final series against what could potentially be the Thunder again or a different team, you'll have a chance at that point. I don't think that the way they were dismantled by Indiana this year should make them say we need to make drastic roster changes. It's a talented team. And I think you can respond in other ways than destroying your roster or making dramatic changes, improve in other ways. But we'll see what they end up doing. As I said, very talented roster. We'll talk about some of the specifics for some of these guys here, starting with Donovan Mitchell, who was the leading scorer this season. He actually I guess, statistically kind of took a step back this year. Field goal percentage took a hit, assists went down, rebounds went slightly down, points went slightly down, minutes went down. And I think a pretty, not massive factor there, but I think the fact that Cleveland was blowing teams out definitely is a little bit of a factor at the minutes going down. There's so many games that they blew teams out where Donovan Mitchell just saw his less minutes. So I don't think that was necessarily something to be super concerned about, other than it's just something that happens because Cleveland was winning games, but also Kenny Atkinson, just wanting to rely on Donovan Mitchell and less than other teams have in the past that he's played for, other coaches that he's played for, trying to maximize their depth and really rely on the depth that they have. Which isn't phenomenal for fantasy, but it makes sense for this team, makes sense for the longevity of this team, for them to try to win a championship. Didn't work out this past season, but I'm not super concerned. We might see Donovan Mitchell get up to like 33 minutes per game this year. First 2 seasons in Cleveland, he was at 35, 36 minutes per game. It's not a drastic change, but I don't think we're going to see that again. And honestly, I don't think we need to for him to get back to being a late first, early second round player in 9-cat leagues. The field goal percentage had dropped off this year. And I think that ended up being a bigger factor than the decrease in minutes. He shot 44.3% from the floor this year. 46.2% the year before, 48.4% 2 years ago. And the free throw percentage also dropped off a good bit. He was at 82.3% this year after being at 86.5 and 86.7% the year before. So goes from being a high level free throw shooter to a average to above average free throw shooter at 82.3%. Say above average, solid, not detrimental, but not as good as what it was. And then the field goal percentage dropping, I think, is what hurt him more. Over the course of 2 seasons, it dropped 4%. Not ideal. Not too, I guess, it's not something where he can't recover from it. Field goal percentage also wasn't his strongest category. But if you look at it, if he's able to kind of take the same shots that he did, he was at, he was at 18.6 shots per game this year. 2 years ago, he was at 20.6 and shooting a higher percentage. So I don't think we need to see him get back to shooting 21 shots per game. But I think if we can see him have a more efficient shooting season next year, then his 9-cat value will increase. And there's no reason to think that that's not a possible scenario. I mean, Donovan Mitchell is one of the best shooting guards in the NBA. So for him to just have a better shooting season, we've seen him do it recently. We've seen him do it in Cleveland. It can happen again next year. That's what I think would be the best case scenario for him to have a bounce back season next year. But it goes under the radar in the sense that his production did drop this year because Cleveland was more successful as a team. So maybe nobody's even concerned about that at all, but I think it's a reason that his 9-cat value dropped slightly. Hopefully he'll have a better shooting season next year. He also was available for most of the year, which was encouraging. He played 55 games the year before, but he was available for 71 games this year, which includes missing the final 4 games after Cleveland had kind of already wrapped up the number 1 seed. So that availability was huge. Only missed games every once in a while. Didn't miss 1 in November, 1 in January, 1 in February, 1 in March, 3 in March, 4 in March, and then 4 in April. So role started to decrease after Cleveland was close to locked into a number 1 seed, started missing games. Not too concerned about Donovan Mitchell. He's going to continue to be a stud for a handful more seasons. And if he's seen as one of the untouchables in Cleveland, as far as they're not looking to move him or Evan Mobley, they might be more open to moving Garland and Jared Allen. Whether they do or not, I think it shows, one, how they value Donovan Mitchell or will continue to prioritize him, which is good for his fantasy value. And two, if Darius Garland is traded, and say it is in that hypothetical trade for Jalen Suggs, Suggs isn't a high usage player like Darius Garland is. Garland did or has kind of taken a back seat to Donovan Mitchell, but Suggs would need the ball even less. So the offense would basically run through Donovan Mitchell. Could see his assists leap up a little bit, more shot attempts, more buckets. Would be a good thing for Donovan Mitchell's fantasy value, in my opinion. Whether or not it's good for the team, that remains to be seen. Would be more of the question here. We'll just keep moving down the list of leading scorers, and we'll go to Darius Garland, who we saw a few seasons ago become an all-star, right? And then they trade for Donovan Mitchell, and he hasn't been the same level of producer, which is expected. A drop in usage while playing alongside a ball dominant all NBA talent, pretty much expected. Not bad for Darius Garland though. It wasn't great for his numbers, but he had a bounce back shooting season this year after a pretty poor 2023-2024 season. He was much better this past season, but also like Donovan Mitchell, the minutes weren't necessarily there. 30.7 minutes per game, 20.6 points, 2.9 rebounds, 6.7 assists, 1.2 steals, 2.83, shot 40.1% from three and 47.2% from the floor. Not this past season, the year before, he shot 44.6% from the floor. Saw his numbers kind of rise across the board, which, again, just good to see him bounce back and kind of remind us who he is, because he has taken a backseat to Donovan Mitchell. He hasn't had the ball in his hands as much as he did a few seasons ago when he averaged 21.7 points and 8.6 assists and was an all-star. It's difficult, or I guess a different role for him, to have the ball in his hands, still a lot, but have it less and still be asked to do a lot of the same things. Like you're supposed to run an offense while you're also just allowing this other player who's very talented to have the ball in his hands a lot. It's a give and take. So in the scenario where Garland is traded, which I don't think it's necessarily the right move for Cleveland, but if that's how they feel, that's how they feel. If it is a move where he's sent to Orlando, I think that works wonders for him. Orlando, the past few seasons, has needed an offensive guard that can space the floor. They have so many good defenders. We talked about it during the Orlando episode. Maybe I think the name that I was most focused on at that time was Anthony Simons, because I wasn't planning on Darius Garland being available. But if Garland is made available and they do make a trade where he is sent to Orlando, I'm not sure what else the rest of the trade would look like, if Orlando would have to give up picks or other players, because I would say that Darius Garland's valued higher than Jalen Suggs, in my opinion. We'll see what the trade actually looks like, how the teams, how the league, everybody feels about it. But I think Garland would open things up for Paolo and Franz, but also he would have the ball in his hands plenty. Maybe it's not the ideal scenario where he's going to have the ball in his hands the whole game and be a ball dominant point guard, because Paolo and Franz are still incredible creators. But Garland will be able to set those guys up as well. I could see Garland getting back to what he was a few seasons ago when he was an all-star, which would be 22 points and 8.5 assists. I don't think that's an unrealistic scenario if you were in Orlando. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. If he remains in Cleveland, I'm not super concerned about him. I think if this team just continues to grow together, age together, there's going to come a point where I think Darius Garland kind of eclipses Donovan Mitchell, and it may take a few more seasons. But I think Garland is that type of talent. I think he's really, really good. I think it's just they've been trying to make things work with two ball dominant guards and two bigs, where Mobley has become more dynamic, so it fits a little better. But I think both sets of, both pairs, the guard pair and the big pair, the individuals would be better without the other next to them statistically. And for fantasy purposes, that's what we're looking at, is how productive can these players be statistically. And I think if Evan Mobley wasn't playing next to Jerry Allen, he would get more rebounds, get more blocks, get more maybe like shot attempts, get easier shot attempts. Maybe he would be used all the, I guess, role opportunities that Jared Allen gets, which maybe that's not a ton, but the ones that he would get, maybe all of them go to Evan Mobley. If he's playing next to a smaller four, a more, perimeter oriented four, Evan Mobley gets more in the paint. Same thing with if Darius Garland wasn't sharing the ball with Donovan Mitchell and he's operating on all these pick and rolls. Just those types of things that, they're cannibalizing each other statistically. It may totally work for the team, and that's just what we have to operate with. But the ideal scenario would still be that they were pulled apart for fantasy purposes. That being said, I'm very high on Garland's future. I think that he's going to continue to be a high-level point guard. Hopefully, if it's in Cleveland, would love to see that. If it's elsewhere, hopefully it's a scenario where he will have the ball in his hands more than he does right now. All right. Probably the most valuable dynasty asset on this team is Evan Mobley. He's an absolute stud. I think when he was drafted, it was pretty clear just how good he was going to be. And he's developed into a really good player for fantasy basketball. And he continues to get better. One defensive player of the year this year, averaged 18.5 points, 9.3 rebounds, 3.2 assists, almost 1 steal, 0.9 steals, 1.6 blocks, and 1.2 threes. So we're seeing him add these things to his game. We know he's making his money on the defensive end, hence why he won Defensive Player of the Year. But we're seeing him expand his range outside the three-point line. That makes him fit a little better with Jared Allen, because now it's not two players clogging the paint. And Mobley's been able to somewhat space the floor throughout his career, but this was by far the best shooting season of his career, averaging 1.2 threes per game. Like that's a legitimate three-point threat. Shot 37% from three on 3.2 attempts per game. Like that's a legitimate threat. And then obviously the defense, the rebounds, he averaged 9.3. That was second on the team in Jared Allen, who has that 9.7. I don't think it's crazy to say that both of those guys would be capable of averaging double-digit rebounds. Another factor there is the minutes. Evan Mobley was at 30.5. Jared Allen was at 28. Again, it's partially the fact that Cleveland was blowing teams out, but also the fact that this team was very deep and they were able to rely on their bench a lot, which limited the minutes of the starters. It was a combination of both, I think. So if we saw Mobley playing 32, 33 minutes per game, the numbers probably would have looked even better, even next to Jared Allen. But if he was playing 33, 34 minutes per game, not next to Jared Allen, could we have seen him average 21, 22 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 2 blocks? I don't think that's impossible. And that's just me tossing out some numbers here. There's no math behind that other than he was kind of close to that. Another thing with Cleveland is we mentioned at the beginning, and this wasn't like a new idea, but they were limited by injuries in the postseason. But that didn't happen during the regular season because they really did benefit from health during the regular season, specifically to their core four. Jared Allen played all 82 games. Mitchell and Mobley each played 71 games, and then Garland played 75. So Garland missed 7 regular season games, and I believe he missed 4 of their 9 postseason games. So, that makes things difficult. And then he has to come back from the injury, probably not 100% playing through that. And then there was all the other reported injuries of everybody else that was all banged up. A lot of what it comes down to in the NBA is luck. It happens in the NBA. It happens in fantasy. A lot of it just ends up being who gets the luckiest with injuries, which is a kind of lame way of looking at it. But that ends up happening. Stinks, but a lot of times just who's the healthiest. Mobley's a beast. If they do choose to trade Jared Allen, I don't think they need to. But if they choose to, I think Evan Mobley's fantasy ceiling skyrockets. I think he's closer to I'd say he's a first round pick in a redraft league. If Jared Allen's traded, now I'm thinking about that. I think he probably would be. We saw what Karl Anthony Towns just did, just being pulled away from Rudy Gobert and just being made the starting center. If Evan Mobley's in the scenario where that happens, where he goes from being this power forward in a two big lineup where he's the more perimeter oriented guy, and all of a sudden is now the starting center on a team. Yeah, I think Evan Mobley would be a first round pick. We'll see if it ends up happening. If it does, get ready. Evan Mobley's going to be in for a monster season, and likely more than just one. All right, continuing down. We'll just finish up the core four here with Jared Allen, who's only 27 years old. It feels like for some reason he's been in the league a lot longer than that. But only 27 years old. And I think that's the interesting part about this core, that the way it's built. I mean, Allen and Donovan Mitchell are both 2017, like drafted 2017, whereas Garland was 2019, was part of the 2019 class. So he's only been in the league two fewer seasons than Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell, but it feels like, at least in my mind, I think Darius Garland is this young point guard with upside. Well, maybe he's a little bit older than I give him credit for, or than he is in my head. Whereas Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen, I see as like these veterans in their prime, which they are, but they haven't been in the league that much longer and are younger than I think I associate with them in my head. Maybe that's just me. Everybody's like, "Oh, that's stupid," which is fair. Jared Allen doesn't miss games, which is huge, or at least didn't this past season. Played in 91 total games, including the playoffs. We saw his minutes dip down the previous 3 years, right around 32, 33, 32 minutes per game. It was down to 28, which we mentioned earlier. Traditional center skill set. We know he's going to shoot a high field goal percentage. He'll have some random games where he gets 11 shots and makes 10 of them. Good on the glass. Generally speaking, a good shot blocker. Not like a dominant guy. Part of that was the minutes. But he's strong shot blocker. He was at 13.5 points, 9.7 rebounds, 1.9 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.9 blocks per game this year. Very, very reliable, very solid. Not the most exciting player, not the most exciting fantasy pick, but he's going to continue to be consistent and productive. That's about all you can ask for with Jared Allen. Moving down the list, they acquired DeAndre Hunter at the trade deadline this year. And DeAndre Hunter was productive for them. He averaged, during his 27 games with Cleveland, 14.3 points, 4.2 rebounds, 1.3 assists, and 2.2 threes per game. Was having a really strong season with Atlanta before the trade. And I think that's why they traded him. If you would have looked back to 1 or 2 years ago, he was going to be a hard player to trade because of his injury history. Then he has a healthy season and one of the most productive seasons of his career. And Atlanta doesn't hesitate to move him. I don't think that's because Cleveland got tricked into trading for a bad, like DeAndre Hunter is a very good player, but I think he definitely has a very legitimate injury history that is somewhat concerning. So hopefully he's able to just continue to stay healthy, because he's a really, really good basketball player. Not the best for a category fantasy league, but for points leagues, like pretty halfway decent rebounder, can score points, hit threes, doesn't really get assists. He's a good defender, but doesn't get defensive stats, doesn't turn the ball over. He's definitely a better real life player than a fantasy player. That's just the way he's always been. I don't really see that changing. But as a reserve scorer that can also defend at a high level, fits perfectly in Cleveland. Should continue to be productive for them moving forward. All right, who else do we have? Because we have a lot of guys in this team that are at least worth noting. We mentioned Ty Jerome early in the episode. Don't really know if he'll resign. I'm not fully expecting him to, but we'll see. Averaged 12.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.1 steals, 1.6 threes. Yeah, he never really did anything remotely close to this. I guess you could say remotely close to this during the 2020-2021 season with the Thunder. 10.7 points, 3.6 assists, 2.2 threes. But those Thunder seasons were quite different from what he was doing for a Cleveland team that was at the top of the East, as opposed to a Thunder team that at the time was at the bottom of the West. So this was by far the best season of his career. It was very cool to see him have this kind of late breakout. I think that he's going to get himself a nice payday. I think ideally he's going to sign with a team where he is a sixth man again. If he signs with a team where they make him the starting point guard, I don't think that he'll end up, I guess, being maximized. I think having Ty Jerome as a sixth man is a really strong option. I think having him as a starting point guard is not going to work out super well. He could still be a productive player in fantasy basketball, though. So that would work out well for us, would maximize his value being a starter versus being a sixth man. But I'm not super optimistic that he is a starting level point guard on a playoff team in the NBA. But if he wants to go get paid by a team that has the cap space to pay him, that is just looking to be a little more competitive or bring in a veteran to show some of the young guys how to play, like Ty Jerome would be excellent for that. And I think he is a starting caliber guard, but I don't think I would say that he's a starting caliber guard on a playoff team that I feel comfortable with that. So we'll see. Maybe he is a starter next season somewhere else. That would be really good for him for fantasy. Really good for us for fantasy. All right. They also have, some of these guys are probably more just mentions. Max Strus, really solid veteran floor spacer. Sam Merrill, who mentioned he's a free agent, but floor spacer. Isaac Okoro, still young, not a fantasy guy. A good defender. That's about it. Hasn't really been able to develop offensively. Dean Wade, that will be a rotation piece, can space the floor, but again, not a great fantasy guy. Amani Bates, the once heralded next superstar in the NBA, wasn't able to be that, but he's still a really good young scorer. I don't know how well that's going to translate to fantasy basketball because I think it's kind of a high volume role that he'll need to be effective in fantasy, but I don't really see him getting that, especially not in Cleveland. But if he is able to alter his game to be comfortable as a role player, then maybe. But I think at this point, he's not much more than just a stash with some upside. I think the two other players that are probably worth talking about at this point are, well, for number one is Craig Porter Jr., who, like, the numbers don't look great if you're just looking at box score stats, but what he did last season, more so last season, but also in flashes and spurts this season, show that he can be a really strong fantasy player if he gets the chance. And it may take a couple more years of development, but I think he's worth stashing at this point. He had a couple games last season where he was able to start, whether it was Donovan Mitchell out or Darius Garland out. Just looking back to, this is from last season, so this was like 2023, 2024. He had a 21-4-4-2-1 game, a 12-3-9, a 16-2-5-1-2, a 7-3-11, a 19-7-8, a 9-12-7-3-1. So like these like well-rounded stats that are box score stats. Defensively, I think is kind of his strongest fantasy like path. This year, regular season finale, 25-5 with 2 blocks, also hit 4 threes. And I think that is the most notable thing because he's not a great three-point shooter. Or he hasn't been a great three-point shooter. This season, he shot, 43.8% from three on less than one attempt. So that just means that he had a couple of he didn't shoot too many. Played 10.1 minutes per game, so wasn't in a high volume role. But if he can improve as an outside shooter, I think he can be good enough as a defender, decent enough playmaker to be able to be a really solid rotation piece in the NBA. And as he gains more and more minutes, he'll just be more and more effective in fantasy. I think Craig Porter Jr. is absolutely worth stashing on this Cleveland team, even if he doesn't remain in Cleveland. I know I remember seeing last year when he was having these solid games, a lot of Derek White comparisons in the sense that if he improves as a shooter, he can be really effective in real life and really effective in fantasy basketball. So hopefully we're able to see that development from him. If Craig Porter Jr. is sitting on your waiver wire or just as a free agent in your dynasty league, and you guys roster enough players, I think he's absolutely worth stashing. If you're in a dynasty league where you like have 12 teams, 15-man rosters, then you're rostering 180 players. It's probably one, not deep enough to be a true dynasty league, but two, you probably aren't going to roster Craig Porter Jr. But if you're in your classic 30-team league, or you're in a 12-team league where you're rostering 25 to 30 players to really get, I guess, the full range of building a dynasty in the NBA with all the players, I think Craig Porter Jr. is a player that is worth stashing. And then the last guy that would be worth mentioning and discussing is Jalen Tyson, who Cleveland got in the first round this year. They drafted him with pick 20. And I think he's kind of a dynamic player that had some really strong, I guess, numbers in college. Kind of a well-rounded guy, but didn't play a significant role in his rookie year, which makes sense for a late first-round pick on a 64-win team. Even though he was an older rookie, the fact that he didn't play a significant role isn't that surprising. But he did get a few opportunities to play a lot in that regular season finale. Played 46 minutes at 31-7, 4-3-1 with 4 threes. And I don't think he'll ever play a high enough volume role for him to get that. But one of his other starts, this was back in November, he had 16-11, 7-2 with a 3. Didn't play. He had another start that wasn't very good, 4-5-4. Didn't really play that much. Had a few games where he played significant minutes, but didn't play that much. But I still think he's a guy that has upside, is exciting. One of the few, I guess, young upside pieces in Cleveland. A lot of what they have is already in the rotation. Tyson and Craig Porter Jr. and Amani Bates to an extent are the guys that are worth stashing on this team. So especially because Cleveland doesn't have the rights to their own first-round pick until 2030. Having Tyson as a player to kind of develop on the bench will be huge for them because they don't have many other ways to add young talent to this roster other than hoping they are able to get some steals in the draft. So excited to see what Tyson can become. That's going to do it for this episode. I think Cleveland's in a great position, even though the ending to this past season was a bit disappointing. I think that they have enough talent to run it back. It's just, do these GMs or owners or coaches have, I guess, is the guts the right word to say? The guts to just run it back with what they have and just kind of bet on themselves and say, no, I think if we just do this over again with the same team, that we can be better. Continuity will help. That's a great strategy if it works, but if it doesn't work, then it's going to get ripped apart. If you make moves and it doesn't work, it's like, well, you tried. Of course, if it doesn't work, they're probably going to tear you apart either way. So what do you believe most in? We'll see what Cleveland opts for, and we'll see how we are able to respond in fantasy basketball in general, but specifically in dynasty leagues. I'm sure if any major moves happen, we will be breaking them down right here. But as I said, that's going to do it for this episode. If you missed yesterday's continued mock draft with Matt Lawson, definitely be sure to go check that out. That's been a fun series that will continue. And then we will wrap up this week tomorrow by talking about the Warriors. But make sure to check out that episode with Matt. Check out the Rockets episode that was earlier this week. I know that one came out at a weird time as well, so would have been pretty easy to miss that. We've only got a handful of teams left with this series before we start diving even more heavily into this 2025 draft. So it's going to be exciting times coming up here at the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Noah Rubin. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at NoahRubin22. You can like, you can comment, you can subscribe, you can share this podcast with anybody you think would enjoy it, or anybody that just wants to like, comment, and subscribe. That's just the thing they like to do. I'd appreciate if you send this to them as well. That's going to do it for this episode, and I will see you next time.